"You're asking my girlfriend to leave." The words slipped out of Daniel's mouth like a thread of steel cutting through velvet quiet, controlled but sharp enough to silence half the room. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. A champagne flute clinked against marble and didn't get picked up again. Heads turned slowly reluctantly, as if each guest at the Halberton Club hoped someone else would deal with the tension now hanging in the air like fog before a summer storm. Welcome back. Story lovers, where are you tuning in from tonight? Drop your city in the comments and tell us. What would you do if someone erased your loved one's name from history simply because of the way they looked? Stay with us, because what began as a routine gala will unravel into something much deeper, where old money, old rules, and even older prejudices come face to face with quiet defiance. It started with a hesitation. A pause too long when the maitre d' looked up from the guest list. His brows furrowed the kind of practiced wrinkle that says problem without saying it aloud. Celeste Hayes stood patiently beside Daniel, one hand resting lightly on the crook of his elbow, the other holding a simple ivory clutch. She wore a sleeveless white dress, elegant, modest, but unmistakably radiant. Her natural curls framed her face like a crown sculpted by time and grace. She didn't need opulence to command attention. She was her own spotlight. But in this room, lined with oil paintings of founding benefactors and floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected only those deemed worthy, her presence felt to some like a smudge on a crystal glass. "I'm sorry, sir." The maitre d' said, his voice dipped in just enough apology to pretend it was protocol. "There must have been a last-minute update. Miss Hayes is not on the list." Daniel blinked. "We RSVP'd weeks ago." "Yes, but—" The man glanced back at the podium, then at the ballroom already filling with sequined gowns and black-tie blazers. These adjustments come from the executive office. That was when Daniel's voice cut through the air. "You're asking my girlfriend to leave?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His tone was the kind that stripped away all pretense. One of the board members, an elderly woman in pearls, shifted uncomfortably in her chair. A younger man in an emerald tuxedo took a sip of wine he didn't seem to enjoy anymore. Celeste said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that when you speak too soon, they say you're emotional. When you wait too long, they say you're passive. So she stood there poised, letting the silence do what words could not, and maybe that's what frightened them. Behind them, more guests arrived. White faces, designer labels, polished shoes that had never stepped onto a city bus. Each was greeted with cheerful welcomes and flutes of Dom Pérignon. No one else seemed to be asked if they belonged. Daniel stepped forward. "We're here for the Whitmore Literary Gala. Celeste Hayes is being honored tonight with the Emerging Voice Award." Again that flicker of hesitation. Then came the twist. "I'm afraid the award recipient was changed earlier today," the maitre d' replied. "Miss Hayes' name is no longer on the program." And just like that, her identity, her worth, was revised. With a single administrative whisper, she had gone from honoree to outsider. No explanation, no apology. Just a door closing politely but firmly. But here's the thing about erasing someone like Celeste: when you've spent your whole life being told you're not quite enough, you don't crumble when it happens again. You notice it. You document it. And if you're lucky, you have someone standing next to you who refuses to stay quiet. Daniel turned to her. His jaw clenched. "Do you want to go somewhere else?" Celeste inhaled long and slow. She looked past the velvet ropes, past the chandeliers, past the people pretending not to watch. Her voice was steady when she finally replied, "No, we were invited. I have the email, and I earned that award." And so she reached into her clutch, pulled out her phone, and showed the original invitation, time-stamped, verified, undeniable. The maitre d' glanced at it but said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence had already spoken volumes. At that moment, a photographer just inside the venue raised his camera. Daniel turned, placing himself subtly in front of Celeste, not to shield her, but to ensure the story wouldn't be twisted. In that frame, something more than a couple stood defiant. It was truth confronting exclusion in real time. And just when you think the night couldn't twist any harder, a silver Bentley glided up to the curb, its tires whispering against the cobblestone. The door opened. A man in a charcoal suit stepped out, pausing when he saw the scene unfolding. His face paled. He adjusted his cufflinks, then asked the maitre d' a question that no one, not even Celeste, expected. Why is Miss Hayes still outside? Who was he? Why did the question land with such weight? Stay with us, because everything you thought about who holds power in this room is about to change. The man in the charcoal suit stepped fully into view, his polished leather shoes tapping against the limestone curb as if time itself paused to listen. His silver hair swept back with the kind of effortless precision that spoke of boardrooms and legacy wealth caught the chandelier light spilling from inside the hall. But it wasn't the tailored suit, nor the way the maitre d' suddenly straightened his spine like a soldier before a general. It was his question that froze the moment. Why is Miss Hayes still outside? The maitre d's lips parted, then shut. A beat, then another. Daniel turned, narrowing his eyes. Celeste didn't move. She didn't have to. The sudden hush inside the Halberton Club told her everything she needed to know. This man was someone powerful, someone the club feared more than they feared breaking their unspoken rules. "Sir, we were just sorting out a small mix-up," the maitre d' began. But the man, Victor Langston, raised a single hand. Not a grand gesture, just a quiet command from someone unaccustomed to being challenged. "Daniel," he said with a voice both familiar and weighty. "It's been a long time." Daniel blinked. Recognition flickered behind his eyes like a match caught in the wind. Victor gave a slight nod. "Didn't expect to see you here, but I should have known you'd bring someone extraordinary." He turned to Celeste then, and for the first time that night someone looked at her not with suspicion or scrutiny but with acknowledgement, like she belonged, like she always had. "Miss Hayes," he said gently, "you were on the original program. I know that because I requested your name myself." That one sentence cracked the marble facade of the evening. The murmurs returned this time, sharper, hungrier. Guests leaned toward one another. Phones were discreetly lifted beneath tablecloths. The curated calm of the club began to tremble under the weight of a truth too inconvenient to contain. Celeste's eyes searched Victor's face. "May I ask?" "Why?" he smiled. "Your short story, Chipped China, was the first thing I've read in years that made me stop halfway through a sentence and breathe." He looked to the maitre d'. "Escort Miss Hayes and Mr. Ashcroft to the head table. I'll be joining them shortly." It wasn't a request. As they were led past the velvet ropes and into the golden glow of the ballroom, Celeste felt her chest tighten, not from fear but from something more complex, resistance softened by grace. The crowd parted just enough to let them through, but not enough to hide their glances. Some looked apologetic. Most looked inconvenienced. Daniel leaned toward her. "You okay?" Celeste gave a slow nod. "I'm just trying to figure out what part of this is kindness and what part is damage control." Because she wasn't naive. A single act of vindication didn't erase the sting of erasure, and tonight this very moment was being watched, documented, whispered about. She could feel the eyes pressing against her spine like cold hands in a warm room. The table they were led to shimmered beneath crystal candelabras. Name cards had been hastily reprinted. Celeste's was handwritten in silver ink, slightly crooked. A detail that said, "You're welcome, but not expected." Victor joined them moments later, unbuttoning his jacket as he sat. "I owe your mother everything," he said softly. "When I was 10, she worked nights cleaning the school library. She let me stay late, read books I wasn't supposed to check out. She told me I was smart before anyone else ever did. That voice stayed with me." Celeste's breath caught. Her mother, who passed 3 winters ago, had rarely spoken of those days. She worked in silence, carried weight without complaint. And now, decades later, her whisper of faith had bloomed into an echo inside this towering man. "You didn't owe me anything," Celeste said, voice trembling just slightly. "But thank you for seeing me tonight." Victor tilted his head. They tried to remove your name, but that doesn't mean they erased your place. And yet even as those words settled in, Celeste could feel a deeper current swirling beneath the politeness. Something told her this wasn't over. The night had shifted, but not entirely in their favor. The people who operated in shadows didn't like being forced into the light, and someone somewhere in this room had made a choice to remove her, that someone wouldn't take kindly to being overruled. As the evening's MC stepped onto the stage and adjusted the microphone, Celeste glanced at Daniel. "Something's off," she whispered. Daniel nodded. "Yeah. And I don't think this room has seen its last twist." They say the most dangerous kind of exclusion is the one cloaked in elegance, done not with slurs or shouts, but with soft hands, polite smiles, and immaculate lighting. The kind where no one raises their voice, yet somehow you are no longer in the room. Celeste sat at the head table now, but every detail whispered that she was still an outsider. Her name card had no gold embossing like the others. Her dessert arrived 3 minutes late, and though she was technically seated, the seat itself felt conditional, fragile, like a favor, not a place she'd earned. Welcome back, story lovers. What do you see in silence? When the room smiles but your name vanishes, do you still feel welcomed? Let us know below and tell us. Have you ever been erased politely? As the MC began reading names of honorees, the ballroom buzzed with rehearsed claps and knowing nods. These weren't spontaneous moments, they were performances built for cameras and donors. Each winner gave a polished speech. Some thanked their agents. Others quoted obscure philosophers. But not one dared mention class, or color, or how the same club that now clapped for them wouldn't have let their grandparents through the kitchen door. Daniel leaned in. They haven't mentioned you once. Celeste's eyes didn't leave the stage. They will, or they won't. But either way, I want to see how far they'll go. And then it happened. The MC, Catherine Langford, a woman with a reputation for commanding rooms without ever blinking, approached the final award of the evening, the Emerging Voice Prize. Celeste sat still, hands folded, breath held beneath ribs that now felt too tight. She wasn't nervous. She was prepared. But something, some instinct, some echo of 1,000 other rooms she'd been pushed out of, told her to brace herself. And this year's emerging voice. Catherine set her tone lilting, like a hostess announcing dessert goes to a writer whose prose captures nuance, whose work elevates complexity in identity and belonging. Celeste felt her heartbeat pick up. She glanced at Victor. He gave a small, reassuring nod. "Please join me in congratulating." Catherine's smile held. Marissa Trent. There it was, a different name, a different face. A white woman in a burgundy dress stood up at table 6, mouth already shaped in gratitude, eyes sparkling as though she'd just won the Pulitzer. She hadn't. She'd just been handed something not hers, but in a room like this that was enough. Gasps were too subtle to register. The real shock wasn't in the announcement, it was in the calculated way it was made. They had replaced Celeste twice. First on the program, now on the stage. Victor's jaw tensed. Daniel sat bolt upright. Celeste, she didn't blink. She simply exhaled, softly, slowly, as though releasing decades of history with one breath. But here's what they didn't expect. Celeste stood up, not to object, not to interrupt, but to walk gracefully, deliberately toward the back of the ballroom. Not a retreat, a reset. The cameras turned, unsure if they should follow. The MC faltered. Catherine stammered something about clerical errors and logistical updates, but it was too late. The illusion had cracked. Celeste didn't look back. Not yet. She walked through the crowd with a dignity that refused to be reduced. Guests parted for her, some ashamed, some confused, and some predictably just annoyed that their evening now had an incident. Daniel followed her. Not in front, not beside, behind, letting her lead, letting her choose. Outside under the night air, Celeste finally paused beneath a floodlight that haloed her figure against the backdrop of a towering hedge wall. She wasn't crying, she wasn't trembling. She was burning quietly. I didn't need the award, she said. I needed the truth. Daniel stepped closer. They were never going to give you the stage. Celeste turned to him. Then they're going to wish they'd let me have the mic because now I don't need it. From behind them hurried footsteps. A junior assistant, pale and breathless, clutching a clipboard, ran toward them. Miss Hayes. There's been a mistake. Miss Trent wasn't supposed to. Celeste held up a hand. Save it, but the board. She looked him dead in the eye. The board knew. The moment they saw who I was, the only mistake was thinking I wouldn't notice. She turned back to Daniel. Now, let's go make sure the world does. Because when the front door closes and the stage denies you sometimes the most powerful move is building your own platform. Stay with us. The story isn't about revenge, it's about reclamation. And the people behind the curtain, they're about to feel what it's like to be the ones shut out. There's a kind of silence that doesn't calm the air, it charges it. A silence that follows exposure. That trails behind truth like a scent no cologne can mask. It's not absence of noise, it's the presence of consequences. That silence followed Celeste Hayes and Daniel Ashcroft as they walked away from the Halberton Club that night. But the real storm didn't start on the sidewalk. It started online exactly 12 minutes later. Daniel, seated in the back of the rideshare, uploaded the clip. No voiceover, no hashtags, just raw footage. Celeste's name erased the award handed to someone else and a woman in white, choosing dignity over spectacle. A caption, "This is how erasure works." Elegant, practiced, and unapologetic. The reaction was not polite. It was electric. Welcome back, truth seekers. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your city below and tell us. Have you ever been erased and told to be grateful for the silence that followed because tonight's story isn't just about a stolen award. It's about what happens when the curtain finally tears and the machinery behind it panics. By morning, Hat or Celeste was erased was trending in 7 countries. Major literary blogs picked it up. Screenshots of the original program where Celeste's name had been listed just hours before the event circulated widely juxtaposed against the final lineup. Marissa Trent, the woman who accepted the award, disabled her comments. The Halberton Club released a one-sentence statement. We are investigating an administrative oversight. But it wasn't oversight, it was orchestration, and Celeste knew it. She sat in her apartment still wearing the white dress, the fabric creased slightly from where she'd clenched her fists, her laptop open, her phone vibrating every few seconds with messages of support, confusion, fury. But what struck her most were the private DMs from interns, junior staff, anonymous insiders. They weren't all brave, but they were enough. One message read, "Your name was on the program until noon." The change came from Catherine Langford's office. Elliot approved it. "I'm sorry. I just couldn't say anything then." Another, "They didn't want someone too political accepting the award. Said it might distract from donor focus. And the one that made her pause longest of all, they knew exactly who you were. That's why they made sure you wouldn't be seen." Celeste stared at the screen, the text glowing like an unburied secret. Daniel walked in quietly, coffee in hand. "You've got about 15 interview requests, and Victor's team just called he's furious. Wants to go public." Celeste looked up. "No, not yet. Not until I have everything." Because she wasn't going to scream into the void. She was going to document it, piece by piece, thread by thread, until there was no plausible deniability left to hide behind. They started gathering emails, time-stamped edits to the program file, texts between staffers, a quietly recorded voicemail from an assistant who'd overheard Catherine Langford say, "She's not our image. Not this year. Not our image." 3 words that said everything. Celeste sat still absorbing it, not as a victim, but as a strategist. This wasn't just a personal insult. It was a blueprint, one she could trace and expose. And for the first time in days, she smiled not from joy, but from resolve. "They thought I'd just disappear," she said. "They forgot I write for a living, And write she did. That night, Celeste drafted a column, not a rant, not a grievance, but a story told with the same lyrical strength that had earned her that award in the first place. A story about being silenced while the room clapped for voices like hers. About doors opened just wide enough to let in applause, but not change. Daniel read it quietly when she was done, then looked at her with something between pride and awe. This doesn't just hit back, it rises above. She scheduled it to publish at 6:00 a.m. sharp. What she didn't expect, what no one did, was who would share it first. At 6:03 a.m., Victor Langston retweeted it with a single line, "I watched this happen. I did not stop it in time. I will not stay silent now." By 6:15 a.m., the New York Standard had reached out. By 7:00 a.m., a former Halberton board member emailed Celeste offering access to internal minutes that showed conversations about image alignment with donors. The curtain wasn't just tearing, it was falling. Stay with us. Because in the next chapter, a room built to keep her out will have to answer for what it did when the world watched her walk away. It wasn't a press tour. It wasn't a campaign. Celeste never chased the spotlight it found her because someone tried to turn it off. By the second morning, her column had reached nearly 500,000 readers. Not because it was loud, but because it was true. Quietly, devastatingly true. Written in the kind of voice that doesn't scream to be heard, it simply refuses to be ignored. And then the calls began. Talk shows, editorial boards, alumni networks, even a museum exhibition curator. Everyone suddenly wanted to talk about representation, about diversity and inclusion, about how unfortunate her experience was. It was like a parade of apology notes wrapped in opportunity. But Celeste knew better. "They're not sorry for what happened," she said to Daniel as they walked through a quiet park near their apartment. "They're sorry they got caught." Daniel didn't disagree. He just nodded slowly, watching a golden retriever chase pigeons with more freedom than some people had in a ballroom full of donors. And yet, despite all the noise around her, Celeste wasn't interested in being a headline. She wasn't interested in revenge. What she wanted, what she needed, was clarity and consequence. So she made a decision. She reached out to 3 women she trusted, Black writers, each of whom had quietly stepped away from prestigious institutions after similar acts of soft erasure. They met in a corner cafe, no press, no microphones, just ink-stained fingers and lived truth. And out of that conversation came something far more powerful than a speech. They organized a panel public open door, no sponsors, no filters, titled "The Cost of Being Seen." When institutions invite the image but not the voice. Held not in a ballroom but in a local community arts center. Folding chairs, harsh lighting. No wine but coffee in mismatched mugs. And yet, every seat filled. No one came for glamour. They came for truth. Celeste stood in front of the audience not with a podium but with a single microphone and a stool. She didn't read. She remembered. Every word that had been said behind polite smiles, every barrier wrapped in protocol, every gesture that looked like grace but carried a quiet venom. And then, at the end of her talk, she paused, looked directly at a young woman sitting near the back, her skin the color of polished mahogany, her hands tightly clasped in her lap. Celeste asked, "What's your story?" The girl blinked. "I'm just a student." Celeste smiled. "That's how it always starts. But what have they tried to silence in you?" The girl looked down, then up. "They told me my poems were too angry, that I needed to be more marketable." There it was, again. After the panel, Celeste lingered in the lobby. People didn't just want autographs, they wanted space, to breathe, to cry, to say, "Me too," without flinching. Victor Langston arrived quietly standing near the back, hands in his coat pockets. When she saw him, she walked over, not as a symbol, but as a human being finally seen in full light. "I stepped aside," he said. "That night at the club, I should have done more." Celeste looked at him carefully. "You were the only reason I even got to walk in." He shook his head. That's the problem. You shouldn't have needed me. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Victor reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. We're redirecting this year's grant, not to an institution. To you. Build something better. We'll back it, but we won't control it. Celeste opened the envelope, then looked back up. You're not trying to fix this for PR? No, he said softly. I'm trying to fix it because I'm tired of watching people like you clean up the mess alone. There are moments in life that don't explode. They unfold. Quiet revolutions in crowded rooms. That was this one. And as Celeste left that night, coat-buttoned, hair tied back, heels echoing against cracked pavement, she knew something had shifted. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been told they were too much or not enough in spaces that demanded their presence, then punished them for showing up whole. She didn't reclaim the stage, she rebuilt it, on her own terms. The news didn't break, it cracked. Hairline fractures at first, whispers on podcasts, footnotes in columns. But then it widened. What began as one woman's name being deleted from a guest list had become something deeper, something no one could patch over with a press release. The Halberton Club was hemorrhaging silence. A whistleblower, anonymous meticulous, leaked internal emails to the Metropolitan Post. Dozens of them. Subject lines like image alignment strategy, donor sensitivities, and most damning of all, concerns over Celeste Hayes' public persona. The contents were worse. They revealed how Celeste had been labeled as a reputational risk due to her past op-eds about race equity and class. One senior administrator called her writing too pointed for a gala that celebrates universal themes. Another feared that her presence might alienate core contributors. They weren't trying to accidentally leave her out. They had orchestrated her disappearance with careful diplomacy. When the article went live, it wasn't a firestorm, it was a reckoning. Institutions that once courted the Halberton name began to step back. Prominent authors publicly withdrew from their upcoming events. Major sponsors froze funding. A public letter signed by over 300 writers, educators, and artists demanded full accountability. But while the world roared, Celeste stood still. Not frozen, focused. She sat in the new space. Victor had helped her secure an old warehouse in the Arts District, now buzzing with energy. Young writers crowded around long tables strewn with notebooks. Laptops, cold coffees gone warm. The air was loud with ideas, and for the first time in weeks, Celeste could breathe in something other than tension. Daniel arrived one afternoon carrying 2 bags of takeout and a grin. You've officially created a movement, he said, setting the food down. Celeste raised an eyebrow. I didn't create it. I just refused to disappear. Still, it was more than just her voice now. It had grown into a chorus. Marissa Trent, the woman who had accepted Celeste's award, issued a public apology. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't slick. It was raw. She admitted she had been told nothing about the change in the program. She'd simply walked on stage when her name was called, and once the cameras rolled, she froze trapped between truth and opportunity. I should have paused, Marissa wrote. Instead, I stepped forward. That will haunt me. But what haunts me more is that this wasn't a mistake. It was a pattern. And I was complicit. Some wanted Celeste to reject the apology, to be angry, to demand retraction, retribution, resignation. But she didn't, because she knew what it felt like to be expected to perform rage while others performed regret. So, instead, she wrote Marissa back a private letter, one no one would see. And that, perhaps, was the boldest act of all. Meanwhile, Catherine Langford, the MC, the architect behind the original cover-up, was called to testify before the Halberton board. She arrived with confident stilettos tapping like punctuation across the marble floor, but when questioned, her answers unraveled. In one moment that would later be replayed across every major network, a board member asked, "Did you ever personally request Miss Hayes be removed from the program?" Catherine's eyes flicked. I advised we consider all perspectives, but did you initiate the change? A pause. A flicker of something behind her polished exterior. Then softly, yes. That was all it took. She resigned the next morning. But the twist no one saw coming wasn't Catherine's fall, it was what happened afterward. The Halberton board extended an invitation to Celeste, a formal apology, a re-invitation to the next gala, a public opportunity to be honored as she deserves. Daniel read the letter out loud in their kitchen. Celeste listened, then reached across the table for her tea. She sipped slowly, eyes fixed out the window where 2 sparrows darted between power lines. They're not asking me to join, she said. They're asking me to validate them. Daniel tilted his head. So, what will you do? Celeste didn't answer right away. Instead, she stood, walked over to her desk, and pulled out a folder labeled Applications. Fellowship Cohort 1. She flipped through names. Young, unheard, hungry. Then she looked at Daniel and smiled, not with triumph but with clarity. I'm going to build something that doesn't need their stage. And when these writers rise, no one will ever dare to erase them. Some revolutions don't announce themselves with banners or battles. Sometimes they arrive quietly with a woman in a white dress who refused to vanish. The day the gala returned, the weather turned with it. A gray rain drifted across the city like a veil, soft, unhurried, but persistent. It was the kind of rain that makes marble feel colder, silk seem thinner, and intentions all the more transparent. Inside the Halberton Club, the chandeliers flickered against fogged glass. The annual Whitmore Literary Gala was back on, carefully rebranded as a New Era celebration. There were new posters, a redesigned program, and a carefully crafted theme, Voices That Change Us. But the seat reserved for Celeste Hayes sat empty. Her name was there, gold-leafed, spelled correctly. Impossible to miss, but she had never intended to return. Not to that room, not under those lights, not to be applauded by hands that once tried to erase her. Across town, the old warehouse buzzed with life. The room she built was less ornate, but far more alive. Mismatched chairs circled around open mic stands. Framed portraits of black and brown authors lined the exposed brick walls, some famous, many not. And at the center, a small wooden stage. Unvarnished, humble, but unmistakably earned. Celeste stood just off to the side, clipboard in hand, as the first of her fellowship cohort took the stage. A young poet named Amina, 17 years old, her braids wrapped in a royal blue scarf, began with a voice trembling like a match, then growing glowing until the room held its breath just to hear what came next. When Amina stepped down, the applause wasn't polite. It was thunderous and real. Daniel, standing near the door, caught Celeste's eye. He mouthed a single word. This. She smiled, her heart full, not of vengeance, not of vindication, but of completion. Not the kind that closes a chapter, but the kind that opens 1,000 new ones. Later that evening, a reporter from a local station approached her outside. Miss Hayes, there's been talk that you turned down a 6-figure speaking fee from Halberton. That true Celeste adjusted her scarf against the drizzle. Yes. Why? She looked out at the small crowd inside, their joy fogging up the glass. Because some stages cost more than they're worth. And I'm not interested in renting dignity for a night. I'd rather help others own it for a lifetime. The story aired that night not as a scandal, not as a soundbite, but as a segment called Legacy in Real Time. And in that final week of the season, the Halberton board issued their last public statement on the matter. It was brief, measured, but tucked within the official tone was a line that told the story better than any apology. We are no longer the center of the conversation, and perhaps we were never meant to be. And that was enough. Because this was never about winning the room, it was about shifting the room. Redefining who got to be seen, who got to speak, and who got to stay standing when the applause faded. For Celeste, the greatest revenge wasn't in returning to the gala. It was in never needing it again. She had built something freer, something rooted, something permanent. And maybe that's the quiet truth for so many of us. We spend years knocking on doors that were never built with us in mind, only to realize sometimes painfully, sometimes powerfully, that the best way forward is to walk away and build a home of our own. One where no one asks for your credentials before they listen. One where your voice doesn't need to echo to be heard. One where you belong because you exist, not because you were granted space. So, if you've ever felt left out of a room, you were promised. If you've ever had your name misplaced, your story dismissed, your truth questioned, let this remind you, the room was never the prize. You are. If this story reminded you of something unspoken in your own life, don't let it fade. Share it. Let someone else know they're not alone. Stories like this aren't just told. They're passed on quietly with care. If it meant something to you, pass it forward.